You are listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 21st of October 2024 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Chermak. Coming up on today's program, the world waits for Israel's response to Iran and whether yet another escalation is in the cards. After that, we'll look at protests in the far-flung former French colony of Martinique over surging food prices. And then...
I'm Hannah Luton-Smith, and coming up, I'll be talking about the death of Fethullah Gulen, one of the pivotal figures in Turkish politics over the past decades.
Look forward to that, Hannah. We'll also get the latest design news. And finally,
I just wanted to represent Tribeca, represent American independent filmmaking, and think about the films that I was excited to discover this year as an audience member.
The Tribeca Film Festival comes to Lisbon, Portugal. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Chris Chermak. For weeks now, the Middle East has been bracing for Israel's promised response to a barrage of missiles sent by Iran. Israel has instead been focused on conducting its wars in both Lebanon and Gaza, but U.S. President Joe Biden on Friday said he had a pretty good idea of how Israel will respond to Iran. Some of those plans and preparations, or at least the U.S. intelligence community's interpretation of them, have now been leaked out of the United States in an embarrassing development that the U.S. Congress is now investigating. Well, Yossi Meckelberg is an associate fellow with the Middle East and North Africa program at Chatham House. He joins us now. Yossi, always good to have you on the show. Are we any closer to understanding at this point when and how Israel might be attacking Iran?
Good afternoon, Chris. I think we get some ideas from the leaked documents that, to be honest, not that surprising in terms of targets and in terms of method. So it seems the targets are more likely to be military targets, less likely to be either the nuclear facilities or oil and gas installation, less likely targeting senior officials within the regime. You know, at one point, people mentioned whether Israel was after Khamenei, the spiritual leader, but it seems that the main targets are, according to these documents, are military installation, and the methods probably is to attack from afar. Again, what it's suggested is firing missiles from fire jets.
Is that a sign, Yossi, the way you describe that some U.S. pressure on Israel has worked, I suppose? Because in terms of targets, it has been, the U.S. suggestion that it shouldn't focus on oil or nuclear facilities and the like. Do you see the U.S. blueprint in what we're expecting now?
I think this is probably one element of it. The U.S., the Biden administration has been very clear that definitely 2 weeks before such crucial election in the United States, interrupting the flow of energy from the Middle East is the last thing that the world economy needs in the United States. But also, I think if you look at the attacks by Iran, they were all in all rather targeted and causing limited damage, hitting either nuclear facilities or oil installation. Gas installations would have suggested almost dragging the entire region, or at least Israel and Iran, to a full-blown confrontation. And I'm not so sure Israel at this stage is interested. So reducing Iran military capability also show Iran that Israel can target a major military bases, but in hope that it won't drag both countries into a full-scale war.
Now, I understand the U.S. air defense system that had been muted to come and was kind of rushed to Israel has now arrived and been set up. Do we imagine that Israel was waiting for that in terms of the timing of this, and how will that kind of deterrence change Israel's calculus here?
Yeah, I think there are a few elements here. One, of course, to ensure that the air defense system, and in this case, the DHD, is the most advanced air defense system against ballistic missiles, is in place, and with also American personnel. be also for Israel to prepare its own plan, from an attacking point of view, offensive point of view, but also defense. It involved, as we speak, also in war in Lebanon. And an additional thing, those are the high Jewish holidays that will come to an end later this week. And considering that the war on October 7 ended just on the last day of it, I think there is also part of it is to delay it beyond it.
And Yossi, you did mention Lebanon there. A U.S. envoy is also in Beirut today trying to arrange a ceasefire there. I do understand also that Israel has released some conditions for a possible ceasefire. What have you made of those?
I think at the end of the day, in difference from Gaza, do I think there is a link between ceasefire in Gaza, the return of the hostages, what happened in Lebanon? Because the Hezbollah is weakened now, there is an opportunity there, but the blueprint is quite clear because it's basically going, give or take, to two important UN Security Resolution 1559 and 1701, which basically create a buffer zone between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon without Israeli military presence in these buffer zones. So I think if we go on the basis of it back to negotiations and establishing it, that this will establish relation between Israel and Lebanon, I think there is some chances there, but both sides need to be interested in that.
Do I understand, though, one of the conditions, just to clarify, when you say sort of no Israeli presence necessary in Lebanon, but there is this report that Israel would like to have still an air presence in Lebanon. What do you make of that as an idea? Could that ever even be accepted by Lebanon?
I think obviously to demand any presence in another country, sovereign country, is a breach of sovereignty. On the other hand, this has been taking place for many, many years. Israel is trying to create a legal framework for that. I don't see the Lebanese agree to that, at least not formally, but there are ways to go around it. For instance, presence of, even in the air, of international, not necessarily Air Force, but through satellite imagery and other intelligence facilities or capabilities to ensure that Israel and the international community know what Hezbollah and by extension Iran are doing in Lebanon.
And just finally, Yossi, I mean, you did obviously mention Gaza there as well. Do you have any more sense of the prospect for a ceasefire in Gaza after Yahya Sinwar's death as well? I mean, if not now, then when would Israel be looking for?
Exactly. You could imagine that if Israel wanted a victory photo opportunity, this probably should have been the one, and from then try to de-escalate this situation in Gaza, not looking for more targets, and look for a ceasefire agreement and the return of the hostages. But it doesn't seem to be the direction that the Israeli government is going for now, and until the election in the United States, I can't see from where the pressure on it will come from. So I think we are in a very much a wait-and-see situation. But I think probably this should be the direction. But with Israeli government, that some within the government talk about even resettling, definitely creating a buffer zone in the north. And the question, who do you negotiate on the Hamas side when most of its leadership has been basically eliminated?
That is an important question as well. We'll have to leave it there, though. Thanks very much, Yossi. That was Yossi Meckelberg, Associate Fellow with Chatham House. Now here's Hassan Anderson with the day's other news headlines.
A knife-edge majority of 50.3% has voted yes in Moldova's pivotal referendum on joining the European Union, with fewer than 1.5% of the ballots still to be counted. The nearly final results come after President Maia Sandu said that Sunday's twin votes had been marred by unprecedented outside interference. An Indigenous senator has told King Charles III that Australia is not his land as the British royal visited Australia's parliament today. Senator Lydia Thorpe was escorted out of a parliamentary reception for the royal couple after shouting that British colonisers have taken Indigenous land and bones. And Indonesia's new president, Prabowo Subianto, has officially sworn in his cabinet today, a team that analysts have said reflects the continuity of his predecessor's main policies. Prabowo took office on Sunday as the 8th Indonesian president, taking over from Joko Widodo. In a passionate speech to lawmakers, he promised to eradicate corruption and aim to reach self-sufficiency in food and energy. Those are today's headlines. Over to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Hassan. For the past few weeks, the one-time French island of Martinique has been rocked by protests over rising food prices that have tested the island's government and its enduring relationship with France, from where about 80% of the island's food is imported. A curfew in Martinique was extended until today, and more protests are promised by organisers in the coming week. Well, joining me now is Jean-Michel Hauteville, a journalist and correspondent for Le Monde in Martinique. Jean-Michel, great to have you on our program. Tell us, first of all, how, I guess, all of this started.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me. It started the whole situation started pretty suddenly in early September, on September 1st, to be precise. There had been a deadline that was formed by the organizers of that movement, that protests against the high cost of living and the high food prices. And since then, they've been promising to organize demonstrations in front of supermarkets and demonstrations on the streets. And at first, what was a very peaceful protest, if sometimes a little bit, tricky for your people's daily activities, devolved into something more sinister and violent. And I think at some point the organizers were losing control of the situation, because they were not behind the riots, but some, in some parts of the island with pockets of poverty and hopelessness, people would take on any opportunity, to show that they are unhappy with their lives. And that was the trigger for this now.
And Jean-Michel, then, the way you describe that, do you have a sense that control has been somewhat regained? The weekend was relatively quiet. There was another demonstration, but do you get the sense, I guess, then, that organizers have also gotten some control over this? What are we expecting this week?
Well, that's the question that's in everybody's heads right now. So control. So on the first part of your question, yes, a measure of control has been regained on the island. You as of yesterday. But not as of this morning. As of yesterday, it was possible to drive around the island. Most of those barricades that had been set up on dozens of intersections across the islands had been removed, or at least set to this side of the road, so at least you could drive north and south. But now, since the organizers of the cost of living protests have called for more protests this week, I know that last night, during the night, some barricades went up again, and there's a lot of anticipation as to whether this week is going to be another difficult one again.
And Jean-Michel, tell us a little more about kind of what the protesters and organizers want at this point, or another way to put it is, give us some of this background. Why are food prices so much higher in Martinique? I understand also they're about 40% higher than in France itself.
You are correct. You're absolutely correct, Chris. Martinique is a small island with less than 400,000 inhabitants. It's in the Caribbean, 7,000 kilometers away from mainland France, and it gets most of its foods and its imports from France, and it's about 80% of what we eat here is imported, and there's a long supply chain, lots of intermediaries between the stores where we buy our food here and the places where it's made and then shipped And there are all those about 12 to 15 intermediaries that take their own margins at every step. And there are some, there are clearances at the customs here, even though we're a French territory. So it makes so some of those legal and administrative steps are more or less unavoidable. But the criticism has focused a lot on all those companies that usually belong to the same groups, so there's this vertical integration along the supply chains. And so there are these few companies that own basically our markets, our food market, are part of the same group. So they're it's like one group that with various companies along the supply chain, and they're making profit of the various stages of how we import our food. And that's where the criticism has been. So these companies are saying, well, that's just part of their doing business and being profitable. And so that's what they've been saying for years, because the discontent over high food prices didn't start last month. It's been something I've been hearing my whole life, for sure.
Well, then just finally, Jean-Michel, as you suggest there, if you've been hearing this your whole life, do you have any sense of what might resolve this current round of protests? What do the protesters want? What do you think can be done to satisfy their demands on the companies or the French government?
Well, there was a huge breakthrough last week, and we were hoping that this would that would really quell the anger, and that would at least make things easier for the foreseeable future. There was an agreement that was signed, about a 12-page agreement between public authorities and private partners. That includes the state and the local authorities and the retailers, wholesale companies, transporters, and whatnot. And they aim to reduce the food prices for some about 6,000 food items in supermarkets out of about 40,000 items that are available in our supermarket aisles, and those prices are said to be going down by about 20% by late next year, when every step of the agreement is reached. And so the solution includes so everybody will be making efforts, so there'll be less taxes on those prices, but those taxes, like for example, like VAT and local taxes, there would be a compensation on those tax losses on other products, more luxury, more premium items. So that basic food items would be less heavily taxed. And then the transporters and retailers are saying they will be lowering their margins on those items and stuff. So there is some way, to find a solution. What the organizers then said was that it was not far-reaching enough. It's 20% on basically something like 20% or 25% of our, what we buy in the supermarkets. So that's not 40% on all the food. So now we'll see if they will manage to pressure the authorities and businesses into giving more. We'll see.
Negotiations will continue, no doubt, this week. Jean-Michel Hauteville in Martinique, thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. You are back with The Briefing on Monocle Radio. I'm Chris Chermak. Fethullah Gulen spent many decades as an influential voice in Turkish politics and society, but his future took a turn about a decade ago. A one-time ally of President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, he fell out with the president and was later accused of orchestrating a coup against Erdogan in 2016. charges that led to a purge of his movement, Hizmet, in Turkey. This despite Gulen denying the charges to the very end. Gulen died in exile in the United States at the age of 83 on Sunday. And joining us now is Hannah Lucinda Smith, Monocle's Istanbul correspondent, for more. Hannah, first of all, let's start with, I suppose there are very different versions of who Gulen was, but tell us yours.
Sure. Well, I mean, he's been a figure active and known in Turkish politics for decades. He actually trained initially with the state religious agency as an imam, but fairly soon after he'd qualified, he sort of started to work freelance. This was in the 1960s. He was going around to various villages and towns, holding meetings in town squares, and he built his own personal following. That's something that quite unusually he used to political ends. He not only set up study groups, kind of religious study groups, but also schools, also dormitories, a real kind of network to build up his own network of followers and then to get them into positions within the state. So he particularly encouraged his followers to get positions within the judiciary, the police, within the various ministries. And as you mentioned, when Erdogan came to power at the beginning of this millennium, actually, they were kind of allies. Erdogan saw Gulen and Gulen's followers as kind of useful tools for him to get some kind of control over the Turkish bureaucracy. That lasted for about a decade and a half. As you said, Erdogan then accused Fethullah Gulen of being behind this coup attempt in Turkey in 2016. And since then, there's been a widespread crackdown on anyone who's accused of being part of that network. So a really kind of long, complex, twisting history in Turkey.
And Hannah, given the way you described, I suppose before we get to the relationship with Erdogan himself, given the way you described what he set up in Turkish society, schools, etc., and so forth, do you have any sense of how that still exists today, I guess, whether there will be parts of Turkey that will also, for that matter, be marking his death as a result of that?
Yeah, well, certainly the schools, I mean, back in 2013, 2014, really the crackdown on the Gülenists started there. I remember here in Istanbul, overnight, a lot of schools, particularly colleges that are focused on preparing students for their university entrance exams, overnight closed. And then over the years to come, and particularly after that coup attempt, there really has been a kind of all-out purge. So things like the seizures of businesses and assets, a lot of very high-ranking businessmen who are accused of being Gülenists have fled to places like London. Also, sackings of people within the state. So, and I should say also, these purges are still going on. We're nearly a decade on from that coup attempt, 8 years on. And still almost every week in the Turkish press, you read of, roundups of people within various ministries, also within the army, who the state is accusing of being part of this network. But it's really sort of hard to get a clear grasp on exactly how influential that network was by the end. Certainly, there was a point, particularly during the 1980s, 1990s and 2000s, when that network was incredibly powerful, particularly in the judiciary. But right now, I mean, the purge has been such that it's quite difficult to see any evidence of them in Turkish society today.
And Hannah, I'm sure this is a very difficult question to ask there, but yet I'd still be curious if you can explain a little more why the shift. Do we have a sense in Turkey of why Erdogan fell out with Fethullah Gulen and blamed him for this coup?
Well, again, it's not entirely clear, but there are certainly a couple of points where they clashed. One of them was the Kurdish issue here in Turkey. Now, it's kind of hard to remember it now, but back in the first decade of his tenure, Erdogan was very much focused on trying to solve the Kurdish issue, to reach out to the PKK, that's the militant group that's been fighting an insurgency in eastern Turkey for decades, and try and reach some kind of peace deal. The Turkish intelligence services were meeting with PKK members, and Gulen was very, very anti that, openly anti that. So that was one area where they clashed. And also, it seems to have been a bit of a clash of egos. You've got here two Islamists, two big ego, very charismatic, Islamist guys, both trying to occupy this place within Turkish politics. And it seems very clear that at some point around 2012, 2013, Erdogan started suspecting that Gulen actually might be more of a threat to him than an ally.
And given that, then the big egos that you described there, I guess the question now is any part of Gulen's movement going to survive him and his passing, either within Turkey or abroad for that matter?
It's really, really hard to see. I mean, the first thing, of course, is the amount of pressure that's been put on the network over the past 10 years, really kind of destroying a lot of their power base here in Turkey. But also, it was such a personalized movement. You mentioned there one name for Gulen's movement, Hizmet. That just means service in Turkish. But commonly in Turkish, they're known as FETÖ'cü or Gülenists in English. Very much a movement personalized around this man and around the things he said. It was almost seen kind of like a messiah type figure by his followers. So I think it's quite difficult to see how the movement can really carry on after those two blows.
Hannah Smith, thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. You are back with The Briefing, and it's time now for a roundup of the latest design news. I'm joined for that by Samantha Say, writer, editor, and consultant. Samantha, we're going to start in Paris. There is a new Dior photography exhibition.
We are, and it is absolutely stunning. So the House of Dior has released this new collaboration. It's going to be, actually, they released it last week, and it's shown at La Galerie Dior, which is right behind their their big store on Avenue Montaigne. And it is featuring Peter Lindbergh and his works. Peter Lindbergh, of course, is one of the most famous fashion photographers of all times, I guess. You know, he created a lot of iconic Vogue images and a lot of iconic images for a lot of other brands. So what they're doing is I wouldn't say it's a retrospective, but definitely it's accumulation of his work for the brand from 1988 to 2018 with some unreleased photos of a photo shoot that was taken in New York City in 2018 before the photographer passed away, featuring a lot of couture wear on the streets of New York. Real people where couture can be seen.
So Parisians can head to see a photography exhibition of Lindbergh's work. And you also have news, though, heading over to the US. Anyone attending Miami Art Week later on this year will get to the delights of the musician Jewel.
Yes, indeed. I can't believe we're already talking about Miami Art Week. Well, musician Jewel is also a visual artist, and she will be showcasing a new installation at the Fayana district from December 3rd onwards. It's a giant 7-foot sculpture called The Heart of the Ocean, and she's worked with leading scientists from NASA, NOAA, Stanford, UC Berkeley, and she's recorded the temperature variations, the migratory animal patterns, and wave activity to create this sort of custom 12-minute soundscape to give the sea a resonant voice. It's definitely a commentary on climate change, also on mental health. So I think this is a really great new project for us to see Jewel in.
And are you excited for Miami Art Week in general? I mean, it's interesting that so many things are already coming out now.
I am. I think it's just such an incredible event. The whole city gets involved. You know, it's really a great time. It's a great time to celebrate sun in December, but also art, design, and, different parts of Miami. And it's grown so much in the past 2 decades that it's unbelievable to me. It's absolutely the most exciting way to end the year.
Well, finally, Samantha, we do want to head over to London right here because you have news of a Turkish artist coming to Greenwich.
Absolutely. So Turkish-born artist Malik Zeynep Balut, she will be unveiling her newest work, Duo, later on this week. And that's going to be at the Old Royal Naval College in Greenwich in London. So it's this stunning, impressive suspended sculpture. It's this like rectangular prism that is absolutely stunning inside the painted hall. And so I think that is sort of going to be really great to see, especially as the weathers change and the lights change. So it responds to the historical context with an avant-garde interpretation of like duality, oppositional forces, and it's going to be absolutely a really great thing to go see down in the south of London.
Samantha, thank you very much for joining us. That was Samantha Say, writer, editor, and consultant. And finally, on today's briefing, this weekend, the first edition of the Tribeca Festival Lisboa wrapped up in the Portuguese capital. The famed film festival from New York began in 2001 as a means to unite and attract people to Lower Manhattan post 9/11. The Portuguese edition of the festival took place during 2 days at the Beato Innovation District, which the city had promised to revitalize. Tribeca Lisboa featured a curated selection of Portuguese and American independent feature-length and short films, and Monocle's Lisbon correspondent Gaia Lutz headed to the festival to find out more. She started by speaking to Lisbon's mayor, Carlos Moedas, on the relevance of having Tribeca cross the pond to Lisbon.
I think it's unique because we, from the beginning, we want to be this capital of social welfare where we take care of people that need. And then you have innovation and culture as the pillars of a vision. And here we call it the Unicorn Factory, which is the vision for technology, for innovation. And at the same time, we were able to get the movie sector with arts and music, also with the Tribeca Film Festival, just in a neighborhood that is very poor, where we have we have the biggest homeless shelter of the country. And for me, it was very important to get people that are in need close to innovation, close to culture, because it's not just about having a shelter, it's also about dignity, about having purpose in life. And so if you get all these together, it's the ingredients that I think are needed in a city. Diversity, inclusivity, but also the buzz of creativity on the street or everywhere in a neighborhood.
And can you just tell me a bit about what culture represents perhaps in your mandate? Perhaps you don't have the figure at the top of your head, but where's culture in Lisbon now, and where do you see it being in 5-10 years with things like Tribeca coming to Lisbon?
Look, I want culture. I don't like this idea of like the culture for the elite and the culture for the people. I want to have one culture, and that culture comes from the bottom up. So we have opened so far in these 3 years 6 theaters that we call Teatro em cada bairro, theaters in every neighborhood. We have 6. I really believe on the power of storytelling. And as I was saying in this panel, storytelling is about debating ideas. And if I don't agree with you, but we debate, we get both to be more moderate. Because at the end of the day, I'm going to think, what she said, there's some sense. And you'll say, yeah, I see his point. When you are just in groups of people that think like you got more extremists in your idea because you all agree with that idea, and so you go on polarizing society. The power of storytelling for me is that, and that's what we're seeing here. It's just like the power of storytelling.
And just finally, I know you're very busy, but did you have time to watch any films or podcasts or sessions, and what were some of the highlights?
So there's one, there's amazing movies here, as you know, from, Ezra, that was just like now from Robert De Niro, but there's one little movie, it's a short, it's like 20 minutes, from Carly and Marley Rodriguez, called Dreams Continue. And it's about Portuguese people and immigration in the US. And it's so moving because it's like a Portugal that does not exist anymore so far. So, the Portugal that they're looking at is different from the one we live today. But it's this identity of being Portuguese that for so many Portuguese Americans is there. And the way that they hold it is holding that to the past, to a lot of things that now are different, but they are the inner of being Portuguese.
Witness the most remarkable films, behold surprising TV shows, feel the presence of iconic actors, and immerse yourself in the pulse of global pop culture. It's all converging in Portugal for an event unlike any other. The Tribeca Festival, a global phenomenon in cinema, culture, and entertainment, explodes onto the European scene. Led by Robert De Niro and Jane Rosenthal, it crosses the Atlantic.
I'm Cara Cusimano. I'm the Tribeca Festival Director and SVP of Programming.
Perfect, Cara. So when Tribeca started all those years ago, obviously the world was a different place, the internet was a different place, there wasn't streaming as there is today. And festivals had this really big relevance in putting talent forward. Nowadays, we have all these platforms. for talent to emerge and to be seen. What do you think is the enduring relevance of festivals or of being here physically today?
I think it's about community, and it may be particularly relevant for Tribeca because it was so much a part of why the festival was founded to begin with, about bringing people back together in a moment that they really needed that community. And that's something that we are able to circle back to all the time. We did it again post-COVID when festivals and sort of gatherings in general weren't happening. And now it's something that we can use to really branch out into these new places, like being here in Lisbon. And sure, films are readily available in everyone's pocket all the time, but that's a very different experience than seeing something at a festival, and that's become increasingly a unique place that you can still have that experience.
When you were thinking about, curating Tribeca Lisboa, was there an overall narrative or a message you wanted to get across when you were picking the films? What is that?
I just wanted to represent Tribeca, represent American independent filmmaking, and think about the films that I was excited to discover this year as an audience member, and the films that are in this program. It's a little bit of what we showed at Tribeca. It's a little bit of what has really excelled and popped out of other festivals this year, some films that maybe will be in the awards conversation. So it's only 8 feature films coming from the US, and we really wanted within those 8 to encapsulate a lot, and I think we did it.
And tell me a bit, you used that word independent film, and I wonder if that word's changed meanings a little bit over the years. I'm assuming independent meant perhaps independent from big production companies in the past, but we saw Nora today, director Sean Baker, he's already made Florida Project, Tangerine, amazing films. What does being an independent filmmaker mean today?
Right. I think that there's the sort of very literal definition of these films were made with independent financing. These filmmakers wrote their own scripts and went out and stumped for their passion projects and got them made. And really it's blood, sweat, and tears because of the love of the game. And there's something so beautiful in that and so inspiring. And the films that I get the most excited about tend to have gone through that process rather than being packaged from the top down. But I think there's also, it has become a word that describes something a bit intangible in the spirit of a film. And you think about someone like Sean Baker, where Nora is a film that has distribution. It's going to go on an awards campaign. It wasn't sort of made independently in that traditional sense, but that's so much where he comes from, and that's so much his sensibility. And I think it's something that really speaks to the energy of a certain generation of American filmmakers that I find really exciting today. What we were excited about in Lisbon is the creative community and this sort of very, emerging, exciting young people who want to engage with the creative arts, and a festival like Tribeca can find an audience there, and we can really serve a purpose curatorially in providing access to films that maybe weren't going to make it here otherwise. And that's what a festival is all about.
Monocle's Lisbon correspondent Gaia Lutz at Tribeca Festival Lisboa. And that's all the time we have for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Anita Riota. Our researcher was Sana Jamani, and our studio manager was Elliot Greenfield, with editing assistance from Flynn Simons. The Briefing is back tomorrow at the same time. I'm Chris Chermak. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.